I see. So that's done something odd. Okay, there. So it just blurped for a second. So now you're recording.
Now, well, yes, this is being
And
recorded.
here it
We're
is.
recording our first little Skype test here of how this all looks.
Well, Tammy came up with something very interesting earlier today, and that was, if you go to the CDC's top page, it kind
Uh-huh.
of it promotes the larger, the numbers that we're all seeing about the corona thing. But if you go down a little bit deeper, it actually breaks out the virus as absolutely verified corona numbers are much smaller. And then it turns out, which I think we know, the coronavirus numbers are actually everyone with pneumonia.
Mm,
Like if you remember that spike that happened in China that
right,
time, that's when
right.
they switched over to just counting everyone with pneumonia. So it's interesting. Anyway,
Everything's getting lopped into that one category. Well, you know what else they said is heart attacks have been down.
I read that. I just
Yeah.
read that. So strange. Not just down, but gone.
Yeah,
It's like
right. So
people are
now,
not coming in, and the hospitals are like tumbleweed.
right.
Everyone's like supposed to be the big thing, but the only customers they have are corona customers.
Right. And so anybody who has a heart attack under corona, I guess, is just labeled as corona now.
Yep. If you
Yep.
die as a heart attack, if you have corona, but they don't know because they won't test someone who's dead.
So they just presume, maybe? I don't know.
I think corona is responsible for everything now.
Pretty much. I broke my leg last week. Totally coronavirus related. Absolutely
You just
coronavirus
slipped
related.
on one of those motherfuckers, right?
Yep.
Well, I
Yep.
just read there was a skydiver who failed to open their chute, but
Coronavirus.
died of corona on his
Yep.
way down. Yeah.
Right, right.
It's a weird time. It's definitely strange.
It is indeed.
I don't exactly know what to make of it. I'm trying to always figure out like who's really getting the advantage. And the only thing I can really think of is some sort of you know, uh Gulliver's Travel style, the floating people and the cloud on top with the other class, rolling in the mud at the bottom.
Well, I
And
think
it's
we're the ones rolling in the mud because he took away the coronavirus relief fund inspector general yesterday.
well, I
Did you
know
see that?
because
He removed.
yes,
And so now now no one, meaning Trump does, Trump has complete control of how to unrestrictedly with no supervision or controls allocate that $500 billion.
well, that was kind of the idea. And it's kind of funny because there was a time when Trump was being Trump. Like it or not, he was being Trump, and it was somewhat predictable. He was Trumpian or Trump-Begnabian. And and then all of a sudden he got this scared look in his eye right
Mm,
about when this whole thing with the 2.2 trillion was going through. And I think it had something to do with either they've got a gun to someone in his house, or they said, look, guys, or Trump, we're going to give you $500 billion to just do whatever the fuck you want with. And no one's going to notice because unless you keep a record, we're not going to keep any records. We're going to pretend to let records being kept. But in fact, it's up to you whether or not you keep them or not. So have fun with the 500 billion and play along.
mm.
But so his demeanor changed. He became a little caught in the lights. He seemed a little depressed all of a sudden. Maybe it was as simple as, oh, well, I guess the coronavirus is real on some level. But then I think it's just because he's still such a petulant child that even given the golden apple and even, signing the agreement or shaking hands or bumping elbows and agreeing to, be part of this thing, he still can't do it. He
Mm.
still is like just being himself, but petulant.
Yeah. So you think somebody else is calling it past him? So who is that that's benefiting then?
Well, that's the question, right? Is trying to figure out who it is. Who's actually, it used to be what I called the Texas Mafia,
Mm,
like the Cargill Group, Old Boys, and, because, Nixon had to go and kiss the ring in Texas. And of course, the whole Bush thing, and Reagan went and did it. And I call it the Texas Mafia because it's a reference to the spy who came in from the cold. And the idea being that Texas never left. They've always been independent, and they've
Mm,
secretly been independent the whole time. And so, as the independent Texas working within the U.S., they were really the cabal which was running the world, so to
mm.
speak. So that was, that's the basis. And just a handy thing to use the term Texas Mafia to mean this New World Order cabal, whatever it is. But now I'm not so sure who it is. It could
Mm.
still be. I don't. Carlyle Group is, all the dead, all the retired presidents are now, dead presidents, and the people in Carlyle Group are now, they're all very wealthy, but they're no longer this necessarily. The obvious people are no longer the power structures in the world. So it's
Well,
moved
it's
on
kind of
somewhere
splintered
else.
off into an international thing too, right? Because then, a similar pattern is going on in other places, right? A similar pattern happened in China. A similar pattern is happening, in Japan, in Russia. I mean, there's this all the places where there are major outbreaks. The pattern has sort of mirrored itself, right? So that
Yes, and
the folks who are in power, initially deny or underestimate the seriousness of it, which of course then puts, the majority of the population at risk, Um,
well, it is interesting because China. Can you believe the Chinese numbers? Who knows? And you said you were talking to someone in Moscow.
right.
And what were they saying?
Well, that they were saying that the numbers were being artificially deflated because Putin and folks, well, Putin,
Yeah,
wanted
he's ruling.
wanted to give everybody a sense of confidence that things were fine because he actually needs people to go out and participate in the elections so
Hmm.
that he can become essentially, a czar again or something.
Right. But I
Uh,
think the
you have
fundamental question is,
all these constitutional reforms that have to be voted on, right, in order to gain validity, right? So if nobody shows up, that would impugn the results or call them into question. So he needs a large voter turnout to approve the constitutional revisions.
right. And then so that's like Russia, and then like China's going to benefit from this probably because they were on a trajectory anyway, becoming more globalized.
Mm,
As China itself says, their period of embarrassment, was the Boxer Rebellion era, where they just weren't globalized. Traditionally China was the one with the biggest economy in the
right,
world up until the modern times.
right,
And then, so it's their natural propensity to dominate the world economy. And there seem to be, they've woken up and they're on that trajectory now. It's really the US's to lose in a way, the US empire, as it were, the World War II legacy.
right.
But I don't understand. So I think they would be happening anyway. I don't see that China is the one that's necessarily benefiting. I mean, they just kind of.
Well, I'm saying powers within, right? So I don't think it's any one national group. I think it's these, sort of independent, sort of mercenary factors. These transatlantic, transnational, entities that have this, sort of, ubiquitous influence, sort of between the lines, and
Right.
not as the institutionalized part of any single government, but the factors that kind of operate in the in between of all of that.
Well, if it's not the Texas mafia anymore, then maybe it's the Davos mafia, or Singapore mafia. Who where is this? Granted, it doesn't have to be a national entity,
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Singapore because they're doing quite well with this.
right? They like it.
Yeah, well, they I don't know, I'm sure they like it, but they've handled it quite well, because they have kind of tyrannical social policies, right? Where they say
Exactly.
nobody go out and nobody goes out under like punishment of like very severe punishment.
What was interesting, if you look at a map of the countries which are most affected, the majority of them are it's a map of the West, of the American Empire, as it were, more or less, with some exceptions.
Well, the Western Empire for sure, with the influence of Spain and Britain and all of that.
And what I look at it is, in one sense, you can look at it and see it's a map of the U.S. structure, except Japan isn't really there, but South Korea is, and
Hmm.
Australia, New Zealand, and a little bit in South America, Chile, which is now a big friend of the U.S. But Mexico isn't reporting barely any numbers, but Canada and the U.S. are, and of course, Western Europe, but Eastern Europe not so much. So it is very much like this empire of the Americas, except what I really see, based on what you just said, is that it's a map of freedom, of liberty. And
Mm.
so all the states where there's a lot of draconian martialism, which allows people to be shut down as a matter of policy
Right,
fairly easily,
right.
that's places where it seems like, with the exception of Iran, strangely enough, it seems that those are places where it's under control, and the places where there's more libertarian tendencies for personal freedom to say, whatever the state says, it's like, if I'm going to go to the beach, I'm going to go to the beach. And I'm not worried about being arrested because it's America. I get to go to the beach if I want to.
Right.
That theory is what's spreading the disease, you could argue, whatever
Right.
that disease is, or the
Right.
phenomenon of the reporting of the disease.
Well, again, any kind of disaster or sort of widespread emergency, invokes the tendency to call in martial law, right? Which even in democracies is an extreme form of maintaining social order, right? Um, but then again, if you go back to the previous conversations we've had about Subproject 126 and whatnot, right? That's exactly what they refer to, right? Is that the institutional is the utilization of martial law, right? You know, basically creates like a tabla rasa, right? As far as democratic rights are concerned, and then once the immediate urgency of the emergency it recedes, right? You don't necessarily go back to all of those individual liberties anymore, right? They can kind of be picked and chosen between, right? Just like after 9/11, right? Yeah, we go back to our normal life, except that the government through the Patriot Act could now start to uh, listen in on calls, intercept emails with keywords, which Google does, and things like that, right? So each time the invocation of martial law occurs, right, things tighten and then they open, but they never open back to that part where they started, right? So each time the range of what those liberties are sort of becomes, sort of narrower and narrower and narrower, right?
Well, it is a tabula rasa which is taking place in many ways. And, like in My Dinner with Andre, there's this idea that New York is the model of the new penitentiary,
Mm,
where the inmates are their own guards. People always want to get out of New York, but they never do.
right, right.
And
Well, Escape
and
from New York is kind of like that.
except for Skip New York, if you're Snake, and if you have snakes or part snake, the but now with this, people are their own guards again, right? Many people are like, oh no, we must never touch another person. The head medical guy said we may never be able to shake hands
We
again.
never shake hands again.
Yeah.
Yeah, Fauci said that. Yeah.
And so the people who are buying into that, let's say, they're now their own guards because they must stay home, they must practice this, they must fall into line with whatever martial law style thing which may be coming down the line.
Right.
And so they're becoming their own guards,
Right.
which is very efficient.
Yes. Well, I mean, dictatorships are much more efficient. Democracies are messy.
Yes, very. Hey, let's see if this
Good idea.
works, if it saved it so we don't, or it doesn't crash your